mysterious waving going on. My microphone says low battery. How's that? Whoa! I certainly can start over. I can walk and chew gum at the same time. So welcome. Thank you all for being here. We have a fantastic panel today. For those of you online, hello out there. Please feel free to add questions to the chat room, which apparently is called Pigeonhole for this session. And there is a link, a small bit.ly link, where you can add your questions. So in fact, let me briefly describe the structure of this afternoon's session. We have 4 fabulous panelists, and we will hear from each of them in turn, and then we will have some time for interactivity here amongst the panelists, and then Q&A. I should say up front that I apologize if I abruptly interrupt our speakers, but I am committed to keeping us on time, so I will try to do that as gently as possible. But so welcome, and let me just say a few words of introduction here as we think about the combined terrible forces of militarism and fossil fuels and patriarchy. I'm Joni Steger. I'm a feminist geographer, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'm part of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty team. I've been working on issues of climate change and fossil fuel extraction for a number of years. And I'd just like to set the context before I introduce our panelists by saying that most of us here, I'm sure, understand the kind of ecological saying that everything is so connected. So when you tug on one thread or you pull out one thread, it's connected to the entire ecological system. Similarly, as we think of solutions, there's no singular direct path to a new, just ecological order. We have to bring our integrated intellectual and social capital and sensibility to the understanding that it's not just capitalism, it's not just militarism, it's not just patriarchy. It's kind of this Gordian knot of all of those things tied together, and the interests, those interests in power systems that shape the terrible destruction that we are witnessing all around us. And we need all of the tools in our toolkit, all approaches and experiences to move toward a just transition. Fortunately, we have tremendous intellectual and social forces on our side. Let me not take any more time. Let me introduce the speakers. It will be in this order. We changed the order a little bit, but I think everyone's good with it. We will start off with Edwige Mezamuri, who's the president of WILPF, the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. And in fact, many of you are members of WILPF. And if you're not, why not? Let me just say. Edwige is the president of WILPF Zimbabwe, and she writes that she is on a mission to transform communities away from socially constructed systems that contribute to the exclusion of marginalized and vulnerable groups from the development process. She's a development practitioner with an interest in gender, rural livelihoods, and militarism, and Edwige has contributed greatly in the advocacy and lobbying the Zimbabwean government to nationalize disarmament programs and to carry out programs on the awareness campaigns on the impact of weapons. We will then hear from Diana Salcedo, who is here to the right of Edwige, who is a political scientist from the National University of Colombia with several degrees in gender and human rights from universities in Spain. For 16 years, she's worked with a number of non-governmental organizations, and she wants to be clear. She identifies herself clearly as an anti-militarist feminist. She's very committed to bringing feminist perspectives and anti-militarist perspectives into state processes that guarantee women's rights, the inclusion of gender, and intersectional perspectives in public policies. Additionally, she's a spokesperson for WILPF International in many advocacy spaces. Thirdly, we will hear online from Sylvie Ngomo, who is the founder of WILPF Cameroon. And Sylvie will, well, I'll just say very briefly, the reason that Sylvie is online is that she, and I believe many other participants, international and particularly African participants, had terrible problems with the government getting visas, and Sylvie was not able to get a visa to be with us. So she will make observations on that later. She's a peace leader and an Africa regional representative of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and president of its Cameroon section. Last up of our panelists is Lina Hjärtström, here to my immediate right, who's worked for feminist peace within WILPF for 10 years, including 5 years on WILPF's international board, and was president of WILPF Sweden before starting her position, which she currently holds as policy and advocacy director working for disarmament, anti-militarism, gender equality, and environmental justice. Just a few things in your portfolio. So I'm going to start it off with a question that I'd like to pose in turn, one question to each of our panelists, and just kind of an opening grand question about, starting with you, Edwick. How do you see the links between militarism, environment, and patriarchy playing out in Zimbabwe? In 10 minutes, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you. A very good afternoon to you, everyone. So in my presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the linkages that are there between climate change, rural livelihoods, particularly focusing on the shift from rain-fed agriculture to artisanal mining. By the way, I come from Zimbabwe, the Midlands province, where mining is the main source of livelihood. So you realize in the province that I come from, most people are moving from the rural areas into mining areas because of the failure of agriculture as a result of perennial droughts. So in my presentation, I'm going to look at how sustainable is artisanal mining, especially to women, and the aspect of artisanal mining. Is it safe to the environment, and how it is contributing to militarism? So answering the question, is it sustainable to women? Artisanal mining is not sustainable to most women because it is a highly militarized sector. Firstly, from the local level and at national level, because it is a highly securitarized area. So because of our gender, it is very difficult for us to compete equally with men in militarized environments. And you realize that small boys as early as 10 years are being groomed into an atmosphere of violence, and they believe that violence can be used to defend their livelihoods. So for you to be able to gain access into these mining areas, they're supposed to be militarized. And for you to be able to defend yourself being there, you're supposed to be also militarized. So that's a challenge for women. And we carried out a research when we were looking at the roles that women that are found on mining sites, what exactly will they be doing? And we realized that they are gendered assigned roles. You see women vending, you see women cooking for the miners, you see young girls selling different wares to miners. And this is exposing women and girls to a lot of violence. And most of these cases are going unreported because they are also afraid about the armed miners. So that's a challenge for women and girls. And not only for women and girls, but men and boys are also affected. It's not that every man that you find on the mining site is militarized or is violent. Some of the men there are also victims of the violence that is taking place there. And the use of arms is very rampant in this sector. So that's really a challenge. And then with the coming of COVID-19, most of the young people were not going to school. most public schools were closed and there was no online learning taking place. So you would find very young girls, young boys on these mining sites. So that's a challenge because their access to education is being affected. They are not getting educated. And after the schools opened, most of the young children are no longer going to school. They are actually enjoying what is happening in their activities in the mining sites. And then we have got cases of early child marriages. We've got cases of sexual violence. And during our research, we discovered that there are about 106 murder cases that were reported in these communities. These are the murder cases that were reported. What about the murder cases that were not reported? So I think you can have an appreciation of how this sector is highly militarized. That's at local level. And then looking at the global level now, how is climate change and militarism linked? You realize that most countries in the global south are busy making arms. And the production of arms is also contributing immensely to climate change. And then here we are talking about marginalized communities bearing the brunt of militarism. So I think it is important that we shift from focusing on capitalism, we shift our focus from militarism to ensure that we start finding solutions that are also suitable for local communities, because the effects of militarism are affecting grassroots communities and are affecting women, are affecting boys, and are affecting men. So that's how I can talk about climate change, militarism, given to our local context in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, and well under time, so that will leave us more time for conversation.
Yeah.
I'm very pleased now to ask Diana the same question about the links between militarism, environment, and patriarchy in your particular context, Colombia. And I just say, so that everyone's aware, we will be having sequential translation. So also in my timekeeping function, I will allow a bit more time for that. Actually, it has given us to more time. So
thank you so much. Yeah. Ahora? Yeah. Thank you so much for invitation in this panel. I speak Spanish because it's more easy for mine and translate my ideas this moment. Thank you, Claudia, for traduction. Bueno, ¿por qué el militarismo es uno de los principales obstáculos para el cambio climático? Y tal vez porque es lo más importante a tener en cuenta para pensarnos la seguridad de las comunidades de otra manera. En Colombia, que no es un secreto para nadie, tenemos uno de los países con un conflicto armado que aún no cesa y que ha sido históricamente reconocido por muchas sociedades como uno de los más largos de América Latina, que nos deja a esta altura, 5 años después de firmado el acuerdo de paz, con un 3.4% del PIB utilizado para el gasto militar. Sigue siendo la militarización la prioridad de las agendas políticas y de los gobiernos, y sigue siendo también un reto para la sociedad colombiana mantener un acuerdo de paz en medio de una estructura de militarización, no solamente por los grupos armados ilegales, sino también por la fuerte estructura de los sistemas estatales. ¿Está mejor? Okay.
Okay. So, why is the militarism an obstacle when it comes to talking about reversing climate change and to think about security of the communities in a different manner? Diana starts by saying that we need to remember that Colombia has been in an armed conflict that has not stopped, and it has been called one of the longest in the world. And just to give an example, she mentions that currently 3.4% of the internal gross product is going into military expenses, and that it is still a high priority for the political agenda. militarism. And it is also a challenge for society, not only because it's a priority for the political agenda, but also because of the existence of illegal armed groups and because of the structures of society and politics.
El aumento de la violencia contra las mujeres en el marco de esta militarización, incluso después de haber firmado el acuerdo de paz, demuestra lo que ha pasado en otros países tras la firma de los acuerdos, y es el incremento de las amenazas y los asesinatos a líderes y lideresas sociales defensoras, en particular de la tierra y el territorio. Eso, sumado a las economías ilegales con las que tenemos que convivir permanentemente en los territorios, ha incrementado la bandera política de la necesidad de militarizar los territorios en Colombia con más fuerzas armadas y más armas circulantes para garantizar la seguridad de los y las ciudadanas. Eso ha posibilitado que se agraven fenómenos no solamente que afectan a la naturaleza y el medio ambiente, sino que también impactan a las mujeres de manera particular a través de la esclavitud sexual, la prostitución forzada, los embarazos sexuales en adolescentes y de manera muy importante en el último tiempo en el tráfico de personas en alianza con estas economías ilegales.
After the peace agreement, violence against women has been kept, or it is still there, and it even has increased, which is very worrisome. And we have also seen an increase of the attack against social leaders that are defending territories, environment, the implementation of the peace agreement. It also goes into a threat to the territories and a militarization. The fact that there is violence in the territories currently is being used as an excuse to militarize the territories as well. And that is having an impact on the environment and a specific impact on the life of women. The life of women is being affected because of different reasons. One, of course, violence, including sexual violence, human trafficking, sexual slavery, and also their sexual and reproductive health and rights are being affected.
Colombia tiene una larga historia de extractivismo y militarización que nos ha llevado no solamente a tener el conflicto armado con el cual vivimos, sino también una historia de conflictividad y desigualdades estructurales que han sumado a los múltiples sistemas de opresión con los que vivimos en Colombia. Esto, por supuesto, ha impedido el desarrollo y la sostenibilidad de la vida de los pueblos originarios y ancestrales y ha promovido la militarización de sus territorios y la imposibilidad de mantener prácticas ancestrales asociadas, entre otras, a la economía circular y a la posibilidad de la autosostenibilidad de los pueblos. El mayor problema ambiental en este momento está asociado al fracking, cuya bandera ha sido utilizada por los gobiernos neoliberales que han estado en los últimos años en Colombia, llevando a que en este momento tengamos más de 14 contratos de explotación y producción de gas, metano, químicos radioactivos e hidrocarburos que producen efectos cancerígenos en la vida de las mujeres y de las comunidades. En particular de las mujeres, porque la contaminación por este tipo de productos, de químicos que salen de este fracking, ha afectado las fuentes hídricas fundamentales para la reproducción de la vida campesina y rural, en donde las mujeres son las que principalmente deben ir a recoger el agua con largas distancias, deben cubrir las necesidades de sus familias y se ven afectadas e impactadas de manera diferente por este tipo de contaminaciones de agua y contaminaciones de aire.
The history of Colombia. In the history of Colombia, the connection between extractivism and militarization has been very strong. And this has then also had an impact on the increase of inequality and oppression systems, including those oppression systems that affect rural communities. And among rural communities, especially indigenous communities. Communities that then are not able to continue with their traditional ways of life, including circular economy that they have been living with, and other ancestral practices. Besides this, one of the main challenges currently in Colombia is fracking. Currently, there are over 14 contracts for fracking exploitation, and this is causing immense effects on the communities and especially on women, as the water sources are being polluted, and it is women in the rural areas who are the main responsibles to fetch water for their life and for their families, and they are directly getting affected by the pollution in the water.
El militarismo entonces es no solamente una necesaria reflexión que debemos hacer, pensando también en que la huella de carbono de la producción del armamento y la cadena de uso y desecho de armas y municiones está afectando de manera importante la vida natural de los territorios. El presupuesto del sector de defensa en Colombia es de los más altos del presupuesto nacional en correlación con los presupuestos para los programas sociales, y Colombia está entre los 11 países con mayor riesgo y menos capacidad de adaptación al cambio climático, siendo que la tercera parte de nuestro territorio nacional está en riesgo por los altos índices de deforestación. Eso, sumado a los impactos del conflicto armado y de la guerra, que han afectado no solamente a las personas, sino también los recursos naturales, con la pérdida de especies de fauna, las erosiones, la deforestación, las destrucciones, las contaminaciones hídricas, han llevado a que las comunidades se movilicen para garantizar, por ejemplo, que el río Magdalena y el río Atrato hoy sean sujetos de derechos. La tercera parte.
It is a necessary reflection, not only because of the environmental footprint of the production of weapons, but also because in Colombia, the budget that is aimed for weapons is much higher than the social budget. And Colombia is among the 11 countries in highest risk because of the climate change. 1/3 of Colombia's territory, forests are in threat. And the war has had important effects on humans and also on the ecosystems because of the pollution, because of the destruction of the forest, because of different effects the war itself has had on the ecosystems, to the point that communities have been mobilizing to assure that both the Magdalena and the Atrato River are now recognized as subjects of rights by themselves.
Oh, thank you very much. I was waiting for the next, and I should say I'd like to especially thank Claudia Arenas for being here today and being kind to offer translation services. It's very, very good, and I know we will call on you again as we move through the next phases of the panel. I'd just like to say before we move on to our next speaker, that I'm already picking up threads with only 2 speakers. I'm already picking up threads of commonality and continuity in terms of the violence against women, the production of weaponry, the long-standing kind of never-ending violence and warfare. So we'll come back to talk about all of those things when we have a chance toward the end. And again, I thank you, that well within your time limit. So we're going to have lots of time for a conversation. I hope that you all in the audience are going to join us in that. So now we have, I believe, out there in the ether, Sylvie, are you there? I'm not sure who's doing the technical wizardry.
Can you see me and hear me?
Sylvie, can you hear us?
Yes, but can you hear me too?
Hello, yay.
Yes,
Sylvie, I don't know. Sylvie, let me just say, I don't know if you heard the opening questions, but I'm asking each of the panelists in turn to talk about the connections between militarism environment, and patriarchy. And I know you have a lot to say on that because I've heard you on a couple of occasions. So I'd like you to talk about what you see as the links between militarism, environment, and patriarchy in Cameroon. And I know also you'd like to make an explanation of why it is you're not here in the room with us. So please welcome, Sylvie.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and greetings from Cameroon to all the panelists and to all the participants. I want to start by saying that when I look at the question that you have asked me, the question pushes me to also ask a few questions from my side that anyone can answer. My questions are related to my absence physically in Sweden because of a visa issue. So I want to ask this question. In time of pandemic, how do you feel when you are asked to leave your country and go to a different country to get a visa before going to a conference? I think this is not acceptable in time of pandemic and in time of climate crisis. I also want to ask, what about the Swedish human rights, peace policies, very progressive policies, and most importantly, the feminist foreign policy? These are very important tools to enable the participation of women. But at the same time, I could not come to Sweden because of a visa. So I want to just say that what happened next? Is it good that all the time the voices of the women from the global south are missing most of the time? What happened next when Sylvie or another person wants to travel to Sweden? So I wanted to raise this question before I answer the question that my colleagues have already started giving some input into. So when I look at the context of Cameroon, I want to say that can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we
I was
can.
saying that okay, we live in a patriarchal society where social constructions are based on power relationships. The idea is that the power, the social control, the material wealth, and the social construction status are predominantly male rather than female. So the masculinity, the patriarchy imposes some division, some rigid division of male and female roles. And masculinity comes with strength, with power, with aggression and superiority. So that's why this male-dominated power goes hand in hand with militarized masculinity, with the use of force, of weapon being a right granted to powerful men to dominate and enforce their will. I want to give two examples from the Cameroonian context for you to understand how this dynamic play out. When you want to give a toy to a young boy in Cameroon, he would like to have a gun toy because for him, the gun toy gives him power. He is powerful holding a gun. So from a childhood, if child feels that holding a gun makes him superior, makes him very, very powerful. That is why you see many boys wanting to join the military or the defense because they feel that this gives them extra power. And some men in Cameroon, in some positions, the chief, the leaders, some administrative authorities, this position also give them the possibility of walking around with bodyguards heavily armed. And this is a sign of power, still power. So that is why you see some sectors being male-dominated, like the defense and the fossil fuel. I want to make the transition by taking the example of the fossil fuel domain. This domain is also linked to this patriarchy because it is a male-dominated domain. the fossil fuel domain. And because of the fossil fuel extraction, for example, there is direct impact on the crisis in general, the current crisis in Cameroon, with the proliferation of weapons, with the use of weapons, with militarization. Of course, with greater impact of women, displacement, gender-based violence, and so on. But also, there is a link with the environment, because most of the time, in the community where these companies go, they will tend to displace the population. When they want to extract the oil from a community, they displace the population from the community. And the affected population is therefore facing forced displacement and poverty, of course, because they have lost their means of subsistence. So we can see that there is a link between environment, pollution, destruction, and fossil fuel. And the fossil fuel are also the cause of the militarization. To say that the bad thing is that the impact is directly seen on the women. The women really pay the highest price because of displacement, lack of access to food, water, and health services, loss of financial autonomy, forced prostitution, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that we have this discussion because, and make sure that the feminist perspective are really taken into account, because the women are paying the highest price as a result of this game played between patriarchy, militarism, and environment. The environment is being destroyed on daily basis as a result of the patriarchy, as a result of the fact that the power lies in the hand of men, as a result of the fact that most of the sectors are male-dominated. And this, including, for example, the fossil fuel, is having a terrible impact on the community with the displacement, the destruction, and so on. And at the end of the day, women are paying the highest price out of it. We want to stop now and be ready to give more comments.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Sylvie. We will come back to you, so stay with us if you can. So Lina, I was going to ask you, and I am asking you the question I asked the others about links between militarism, environment, and patriarchy, particularly in Sweden, which at this moment seems to be hurtling into a new militarized phase by the second. But I also would just say that Sylvie has put to you a very particular set of queries around the feminist foreign policy, the much heralded feminist foreign policy of Sweden, and how it holds up under these circumstances. So, I mean, you don't have to be responsible for the entire Swedish government, but if you could talk to this same question, but from the Swedish perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joni. Thank you, everyone. I've been picking up so many new threads as well that I can't barely remember what I was going to say. And like you were mentioning in the beginning, everything is so connected and intertwined and dependent on each other. So there's not really a clear place to start. But since we're here due to the conference that's happening at Stockholm+50, the Stockholm+50 conference, I figured we could start a bit with this duplicity that Sweden is working with. Because on the one hand, we have a government that hosts a huge global environment ambition-raising conference thing. And on the other hand, Sweden's decided to join NATO, a military alliance that is driving climate change rapidly. And I haven't really seen climate as a part of the NATO debate, apart from when peace organizations have tried to raise this issue. And then, like Sylvie said, and if I have any structure, I'll try to loop back to that. The practices around Stockholm+50 and inclusion and who gets a voice, they haven't been great, so to speak. We've been spending so much time emailing, calling, being on hold, trying to find a way for Sylvie to get here. And this is something I'll also maybe look back to, the feminist political economy. Who does work, who benefits, looking at resources, who has them, who gets to use them. And we need to look at this from all kinds of perspectives. But I really wanted to start with one of the most important things that we need to talk about, which is, of course, the Swedish militarization and what's happening right here and what the Swedish government's doing right now. So a lot of the climate conferences are about climate reporting. It's quite dull, but it's still not happening. In the Paris Agreement, in the Kyoto Agreement, states decided they should not report military emissions. That's a defense secret. Then in the Paris Agreement, they decided it's voluntary. And Sweden does not do this. Sweden's really poor and doing a really bad job at reporting emissions from the military. So we don't know how much the Swedish defense forces emit. We also don't really know what other harm they're doing to the environment. But, you know, we have jets and we have huge ships and we have heavy transportations. It's clear that it's a lot, but we don't know how much. So that's one of the things that Sweden's not doing. What Sweden is doing is, of course, increasing military expenditure a lot. Anyone who's been following the Swedish debate has been hearing the defense minister boasting about an 80% increase in military expenditure in Sweden over the past few years. And this was before the increases that they announced this spring and in relation to the NATO application and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this has been going on for a while, and it's just, the sums are, I don't even know if I can pronounce them, they're too large. Then, of course, we have another thing that Sweden's doing is exporting arms. The numbers were released not too long ago for the Swedish arms exports for the last year, and it's increased by about 20%, the revenue from that. And it's increased, the Swedish arms export has increased over the past at least 7 years, I think, as has the world's military expenditure at a total. It even hit a new high on the second year of the COVID pandemic. So this is a global trend that Sweden is very active in fueling, and Sweden is expecting arms exports to rise also in the coming years. And I'm also speculating now that a NATO membership would allow for new exciting partners to pour arms into. And I hope you could hear the sarcasm in my voice there, but just to be explicit, there's nothing exciting about this. It's extremely destructive, and I think that's one of the things we could hear. You know, Sweden's exporting arms or fighter jets to Colombia coming out of conflict. For example, not Zimbabwe right now. This, yes, emissions and costs. Like I said, they're not reporting the environmental impacts, emissions and production cost of the military. Some EU states are doing this, and there's been calculations that state that, well, they estimate that the EU reports about half of its direct military emissions as such. But then, you know, you can put transportation into some other category, and you can put maybe food or something into another category. And so it's hard to calculate. But the other thing is that it doesn't calculate production costs. And this is a very heavy industry. It takes a lot of energy to produce and transport military equipment. And estimates calculate this to be about double the direct emissions. So we have a huge invisible emissions that we're not really seeing. We can just assume that they're there and that they're fueling climate change while fueling wars at the same time. So another thing happening in Sweden is, of course, mining. To make kind of a jump, but also to go back to what Edwig was talking about. Because I think most of us have followed what's happening in the Gallock mine. Some of you might even have been talking about this an hour ago in a room adjacent to here. So the Swedish government is also overruling indigenous rights and a sensitive nature environment to allow for harmful extraction. And we could see the same thing at the island Gotland, where a cement industry was allowed to expand their extraction and their production. And this is an interesting example because cement production and this factory is, I think it's the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in Sweden. Then again, we don't know what the military emits, so let's keep that in mind. And they're promising to be climate neutral if they can only keep expanding. So they want permits to keep expanding, and then they want to do some sort of carbon capture technology where they kind of pour it all back into the North Sea, put it in storage in the ground somehow, and then in 200 to 300 years, it will just be sort of absorbed. I'm not sure on the science here, but I'm thinking it's a long time to wait to see if it works. And I'm thinking it's doing a lot of harm in the way there. And if you have followed maybe the peace movement, maybe others, you will notice that these things are happening in similar areas. We have the north of Sweden and we have Gotland. These are also very militarized sites, or rather, this is where the military wants to hold a lot of their exercises. Gotland is now positioned as a very strategic, possibly target for Russia, but also something that NATO is looking towards. And we have a lot of military exercises in the north of Sweden where we're basically having, you can pay the Swedish government to come and practice your wars here in an Arctic environment. So these are happening simultaneously. The military gets a free pass, and harmful industries that are clearly bad for the environment get a free pass. I'm afraid that we're going to see a lot more overlap between these practices. But one of the things that we have seen is that people have protested loudly and have not been heard, or at least not listened to. There were huge protests around Gotland. There were huge protests around Gallock, and there were huge protests to the decision to apply for a NATO membership, even if they really weren't heard as much as we were yelling, I think. How am I doing on time?
I was just about to say you have half a minute left. Or maybe a little more to just wrap up. But you'll get another chance.
Thank you. No, I kind of like leaving all of these little pieces around so that we can tie them up later. But to bring it back to Sylvie's question, maybe this is clearly not feminist policies. We can see who benefits, we see who profits out of these industries, we see who makes the decision, and we see whose voice isn't heard. Like I was saying, the people who are living here and the people who are protesting weren't heard, and these are the people who are affected. And Sweden is now hosting this huge conference and boasting about giving everybody a voice and civil society inclusion. And it's even been hard for me to participate. And I've been on site in Stockholm, and I've been working hard to keep up with what's happening. And then it's my full-time job as well to do that. So for everybody who hasn't been able to do that, like Sylvie, who hasn't even been able to come, and these things are connected. Militarism happens in peaceful societies, and we're seeing increased militarization. We're seeing border controls, and we're seeing, I want to get into the ad we saw on the way later, but I can say
later.
That. Yes.
We have a delicious advertisement to discuss in a minute. You'll wrap up there? Great.
I'll wrap up there. I'll just leave you with all of those bits and
Great.
pieces.
Thank you. Thank you, Lina. Thank you for leaving us with so many interesting threads to pull. And I mean, this to me is an astonishingly rich conversation already, from Zimbabwe and Colombia and Cameroon and Sweden. And I will just say, for me also, I'm a Canadian, but I live in the United States right now, although I'm very seriously reevaluating that choice. Like, please, can I stay here?
Absolutely.
But let me say that as this big plus 50 meeting is going forward, it's very recent that there have been that there has been room for explicit feminist analysis in environmental settings. It was not, I'm not that old that I can remember just a few years ago that there was no room in environmental fora for feminist analysis. In fact, it was treated largely with derision and dismay. It seems to have shifted a little bit, but I think it's important for us. I believe that you have each already demonstrated the importance of feminist analysis, but I will remind us that the title of this panel is Ending Militarism, Protecting the Planet, and Why We Need Feminism to Get There. So I think I'd like to just circle back again to this particular question of feminism, and why each of you thinks feminism brings either new perspectives or new analysis, either to the problem or to the solution. And as I believe that each of you has already kind of explicated that, but I wonder if you might, you don't have to answer this question, but I wonder if you might each give a few minutes to thinking about how would you explain to a skeptic, of whom there are many, how would you explain to a skeptic the importance of feminism in this kind of context of ending militarism and protecting the planet? I don't know, Diana, would you be willing to take that on? And also, I should say, we also have a bit of time for each of the panelists to ask one another questions of clarity or information. So you could also take that opportunity.
Yes. Pues yo creo que hay muchas formas en las cuales las perspectivas feministas, y ahí quisiera hacer un paréntesis para decir que no cualquier feminismo. La agenda feminista también ha sido cooptada en los últimos años por un sistema completamente hegemónico que intenta hacer pasar muchas de las agendas estructurales por propuestas feministas, ¿no? Y son completamente retardatarias. Pero un feminismo que se ocupe de pensar el antimilitarismo, de pensar desde formas decoloniales, de entender el desarrollo de las comunidades y que se ubique también en una estructura mucho más interseccional que reconozca estos múltiples saberes, es el feminismo que sirve a esta lectura del sistema, de los sistemas de opresión y el impacto en la naturaleza, en el ambiente y, por supuesto, en la vida de las y los seres humanos. Esta lectura desde este lugar situado del feminismo, y en particular desde WILPF promovemos el feminismo antimilitarista y pacifista como una apuesta decidida por confrontar esos sistemas opresores, pues permite o evidencia unas conexiones ocultas para quien para el que le sea útil ocultar esas conexiones, ¿no? Generalmente a quien tiene el poder detrás de las armas, el poder económico, y a quienes intentan instalar esos sistemas capitalistas y neoliberales.
So, about the feminist perspective, absolutely. They can be very useful for this discussion. Nevertheless, we also have to keep in mind it's not all feminism. We have to talk about different feminist perspectives, given also that certain feminist agendas have been co-opted, they have been used to push liberal agendas, which would not be contributing to this discussion. Nevertheless, if you're talking about a feminism which is anti-militarist, which is decolonial, which is intersectional, then yes, then it can be useful to be able to identify invisible connections and thus also make invisible oppression systems visible. And that would be crucial in order to be able to understand better the environmental impact and the impact of the systems in humanity, such as situated feminism, a feminism that takes into consideration these oppression systems, can make it visible, and visible against whom? Who wants to make them invisible? Well, those who have the power, those who have the power of the weapons, those who have the power of economy, those who are pushing for capitalism and neoliberalism.
Esta perspectiva feminista, pues entonces nos permite poner el foco en los procesos de transformación estructural no mercantilista, que no justamente no involucren el desarrollo de las comunidades en la lógica hegemónica, generalmente eurocéntrica, de entender el desarrollo de una manera particular. Esta perspectiva también nos permite abordar los sistemas de poder que hay al interior y detrás de estas problemáticas, y no solamente entender quiénes están detrás, ya sean los estados, los individuos, sino también centrar como las agentes de transformación a las mujeres. Proponer además respuestas colectivas que promuevan el diálogo difícil con quienes detentan ese poder. Tenemos que interpelar a los estados que están transfiriendo armas y armamento a los países en guerra para promover una mayor militarización de esos territorios. Los únicos beneficiados son los países que transfieren estas armas. Las demás personas están siendo asesinadas con las armas que se pagan con los impuestos de los ciudadanos y ciudadanas de muchos países. Y eso lo aporta el feminismo desde esta lectura de las relaciones de poder.
Using this feminism in order to read power relations, it is possible to set the focus on structural transformations that are not within the market. It also allows to put the focus on another way of looking at development, a non-Eurocentric approach to development. This then allows to view the power systems, view who is behind the power systems, but also make visible the transformative agendas of women, their collective responses, and push for difficult dialogue, for hard conversations with those that have the power. As an example, those governments that are selling weapons that are not benefiting anyone else because they are causing people to get killed. And at the same time, these weapons are paid with the taxes of everyone.
Las respuestas ante la crisis climática generalmente han sido respuestas que se mantienen en la seguritización y en la militarización. Esas respuestas han generado mayores violencias contra los hombres y las mujeres y las comunidades. Eso significa que la respuesta que podemos dar desde una mirada crítica, como la que propone el feminismo y en particular el feminismo antimilitarista, busca entonces establecer unas medidas de regulación y supervisión mucho más allá de la seguritización y la militarización de los territorios. Así podremos proponer, entre otras, una mejor gestión comunitaria de lo que sucede en los territorios con el impacto tanto de los residuos, de los desperdicios alimenticios, de las fuentes hídricas, y gestionar desde lo comunitario la respuesta que los estados deben dar ante estas situaciones. Así que si bien el feminismo no es la única corriente crítica que aporta a esta transformación social, sí es importante la relación que se ha hecho entre feminismo antimilitarista, ecofeminismo y otras apuestas sociales críticas como una respuesta alternativa ante la crisis climática, ante la militarización y ante la pérdida de vidas, ya no solo por las guerras, sino también por los desastres naturales.
The answer or the answers to the climate crisis until now have been strongly linked to securitization and militarization. And these have then increased the level of violence against men and women. From feminism, it is possible to reach security in a different way to the securitization and militarization, and thus seek solution to the crisis, to the climate crisis, in a different way. One of these ways that Diana highlights is the communitary management of different issues, of residues, of water sources, and in general, just the collective communitarian management of the response to the crisis, to the climate crisis. In sum, it's not only feminism, but for sure feminism and anti-military feminism plus ecofeminism and other alternative proposals are definitely a way to solve the situation of climate crisis, increasing wars, and all the current crisis we are in, which is affecting the life of everybody in the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, applause always. Thank you. Edric, I don't know if you're willing to take up this question or if you have perhaps a couple of other points that you didn't get to make the first time, but really kind of trying to come to terms with the distinctive contributions of feminism and the ways in which you think that it sheds new light or gives new perspectives on the intertwined crises that we have today.
Okay, firstly, feminist perspectives are very important when we are trying to address the issues that we have at hand, because everyone must have equal access and control over resources. Getting back to my presentation, I think I highlighted that men are dominating the extractive industry and women are not fully benefiting from the extractive industry, which is a challenge because it is widening the inequality gaps at local level. So women will be further marginalized. So it is important that everyone has equal access and control of resources. And I think it is after that everyone has equal access and control of resources that everyone can also be accountable to how they are utilizing the environment. I think I must also highlight how artisanal mining is also causing conflict and contributing to environmental degradation. Firstly, when you're looking at the issues of environmental degradation, artisanal miners are using very dangerous chemicals, and these chemicals are polluting the water systems, and especially in rural areas. Rivers are the chief sources of water, both for human beings and for their livestock. So that's a challenge, and that's on its own. It's contributing to conflict. We have had issues where farmers went to attack the miners because their livestock were dying due to being poisoned by the chemicals that are being used by artisanal mining. So yes, artisanal mining is also contributing to conflict. And I also highlighted why they are taking part in artisanal mining. It's because rain-fed agriculture is no longer useful or productive. So yes, it's important that we address the issue of equal access so that everyone can be accountable to how they are using the environment. And like I also highlighted earlier on, women are bearing the brunt of all this environmental degradation, of the effects of climate change. So it is important that everyone is accountable. So especially when women also have access to the resources, who knows, they can contribute meaningfully to solving the challenges that we are having at community level. More so, I was listening to some of the presentations that were being made here. We are facing challenges from militarized economies. It seems like the global north is profiteering from militarism. That's at the expense of countries that are in the global south. Not that countries in the global south are innocent of this militarization. No, they are not, because they are the ones who are buying the weapons. So this is also fueling to conflict. And where there is conflict, the environment is always at risk. So we need to stigmatize capitalism that is contributing to conflicts and militarism. Then moving forward, there is also need to destroy patriarchy and start problematizing gendered assigned roles. This is a challenge, especially in the global south where I come from. So if a woman is seen being actively involved in the extractive industries, they are labeled. I also take part in some of the mining activities, and you hear most of the community members saying, this woman, she acts like a man. So when you're labeled as someone who's acting like a man, it's not like they are praising you. No, they are not praising you, but they are criticizing you. So it is very important that we start problematizing gendered assigned roles. And then at local level, local communities must also benefit from the resources that are found in their locality. It's only not artisanal miners that are benefiting from the locally found production. We are also having the problems with Chinese investors who are coming into communities for mining. And most of the times when they are coming in, you realize that local or indigenous people are dislocated. They are removed from their land to give room for the Chinese investors. And when they are dislocated, they are not compensated for that. Imagine you have built your home and you are comfortable sitting there, and then after 20 years, the Chinese investors just come and you are dislocated. You have to start building a new home. You are not compensated. That's also a challenge. So maybe if these investors are coming to local communities, we should ensure that the local people are also benefiting from the economic activities that are taking place in their communities. Then it is also important for us to confront militarized masculinities. I'm sure you were listening in Sylvie's presentation when she highlighted that our young boys are being groomed to be violent. They think if you can use a gun, you are powerful. So there is really need to confront that and to transform these societies that are being groomed. Our societies where our children are being groomed to be violent, to be militarized. And then it's also important for us to focus on environmental peace building in the communities. I feel that is very, very important. And that's an area where we are lacking because mostly when we are talking about climate change and the environment, it is actually segregated from peace building. And usually that niche between conflict and the environment is not being talked about. So education on environmental peace building is also important. Then let's also ensure that there is meaningful participation of women through creating safe environments for them, particularly when you're looking at marginalized women. The moment you start to talk about climate change, it seems like it's too scientific for them to understand. So it is important that we break down climate change to a certain point that marginalized communities can really understand what you are talking about so that they can meaningfully also contribute to environmental conservation, and they'll also contribute to restoring the environment, and they'll also know about the rights that they have in conserving the environments that they are in. I think that's my contribution to that question.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I move on to ask Sylvie the same question, I just want to say that I started with my notes here and I thought I would just pull out the really key things, and I have like this, those of you can't see it, but it's like, and I've circled things and I've got arrows and it's like everything seems so key. So I don't know what I'm going to do with two more people to speak. So Sylvie, are you able to participate still? Are you with us still?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
If you can hear, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. And so the question that your co-panelists are addressing right now is if you could comment, briefly on the distinctive contributions of feminist perspectives. Why do we call this panel Ending Militarism, Protecting the Planet, and why feminism is so important? So I'm trying to focus our attention on feminism as a distinctive approach. And I wonder if you have thoughts about that.
Yes, thank you so much. I have some thoughts about this because I feel that the feminist perspective imply an inclusive and holistic approach to break the harmful practices of all kinds. So they are very important to break the link between militarism and the environment because they aim for a sustainable transformation which benefit everyone. I think that this is why the gender analysis is always very important because it helps to study the profile, the causes, the actors, the dynamics. And when these are dynamics taken into account, the process really helps to look critically at the root causes, of issue, to understand these root causes and to understand the dynamics, to understand the stakeholders. So the feminist perspective is that one that aligns with the UN principle, leave no one behind. And it's really a holistic way of addressing issues. So proposes long-term. It's about also proposing long-term solutions to issues, a holistic approach. I want to summarize by a few words: participatory and inclusive, context and gender sensitive, focus on strategic action. And taking the case of Cameroon, I think that we have been, based on our experience, I want to say that this has been done through research, through documentation, through building alliance, through building solidarity meetings with various stakeholders, various communities, in order to challenge the militarization, to deconstruct the patriarchy. So for me, the feminist perspective is extremely important because we are trying to have a better world. We are trying to have a world where everybody feels at ease, with no justice, a non-polluted world. Therefore, there is a need to really question what are the root causes of all these issues that we have in the world today. And the feminist perspective addresses that. So I think that feminism in this regard is the solution. Is the solution because no one will be left behind. It's a solution because it's going to challenge the patriarchy. It's going to deconstruct the militarization because everybody, as educated, is about bringing everybody on the table. It's about making sure there is inclusivity. And that is what is very important about the feminism because it's about inclusivity. It's about questioning the root causes. It's about making sure that all the voices are on the table. It's about making sure the different sectors, the different actors on the community have that name. We value this feminist approach because for me personally, there's no possible development which cannot build on the feminist perspective, which is really building on inclusivity, holistic approach to break the harmful practices of all kinds. So that's what I want to say from now, and say that it's important as we are doing this to build a stronger alliance worldwide to break this increasing militarization fueled by patriarchy, and which is having a damaging impact on the environment we live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvie. So I have asked Lina if she can briefly address the same question because we do want to have time for Q&A from the audience and perhaps from our online audience. So can you explain briefly why we need feminism?
Well, I can give you a few of my favorites anyway. One of the things that I find so great about working with feminism is that it's able to do really complex analysis of problems, but it's also practice. You can do feminism, you can enact feminism. You can do your analysis and then go live it. And And one of these analytical tools is to ask the good questions and to ask all of the questions at the same time. So we have economic question like, where is the money? Who benefits? Who took part in this decision? And we have the very clear questions about where are the women? Where are the men? Where are everybody else? Who's in this room where decisions are made? Who's not there? How do we bring them there? What do we need to do to make spaces safe for women or other marginalized groups? How do we bring privileged men out of decision-making rooms to make space for greater quality and better decisions when different experiences go into those rooms? And feminism protects us from false solutions, like a huge cement factory or joining NATO are clear false solutions. And feminism asks about violence. So it doesn't allow for violence to be the problem solver that it's often presented to be. If you're threatened enough for retribution, like nuclear weapons, then no war and no harm will come. But arms enact a lot of violence, whether structurally, economically, or directly, even when they're not strictly being used. And feminism doesn't allow for the false solution of threatening or using violence, because it asks who suffers this violence, who is actually, who suffers, who dies, who's harmed. So feminism is I think a great, the best tool for not falling into the traps of false solutions, and for, like Sylvia was finishing up, for building a global movement to actually change everything that we've been talking about today. Okay, I sped up instead of slow.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, on my carefully constructed notepad here, I have a few keywords about feminism, kind of mapping trails of power, making visible. A number of our panelists spoke about visibility. And in some cases, that means some of you have referred to structural visibility, such as piercing the veil of secrecy that militarism erects, but also making visible power, identifying unequal impacts, and the number of you, in fact, I think all of you have spoken about violence in its different forms. Some of the keywords for me that jumped out were accountability and structural transformations. Diana was talking about structural transformations that are not market-based, or reframing what security means, and peace building and meaningful participation, questioning root causes, and asking key questions about who is harmed. I think that's a very critical piece. So those are just some of the things I have on my notes here that I would love to continue to have conversations about. But rather than me dominating the questions and prompting answers, I believe that we have time for some interaction with the audience. So, oh great, we have a mic, a traveling mic. Thank you. Could you introduce yourself and just say a brief word about who you are?
Thank you. I'm Mona from Finland. I'm here with Finnish Nature League, and I also member of board of Creatura in Finland. Thank you for everyone. I especially was intrigued by the wording of militarized masculinity, and this got me really interested. And I was thinking, what do you think? What can we do? Do we have tools to unmilitarize masculinity? What should we do that?
Great. So the unmaking of militarized masculinity, our tools. I don't know if anyone here, and then I'll also ask Sylvie, anyone would like to pick up an answer to that? Diana, are you scribbling notes so that you can answer? Okay, all right.
Bueno, pues justamente nos estamos pensando cómo transformar las masculinidades militarizadas, porque creemos que ahí es donde hay una fuerza importante para la transformación de todo el sistema militarista. En Colombia, desde que están pequeños los niños, los niños varones, les dicen que el héroe de la patria es el militar, es el que porta un uniforme, el que tiene un arma, el que es capaz de conquistar un territorio. Desde que tienen 3 o 4 años, muchas familias les disfrazan de policía, de militar, de una persona de la fuerza pública. Y desde ahí están generando estructuras mentales de poder que están instalando estos imaginarios militaristas, que después, cuando son adultos, quieren ir a la guerra, validan la posesión de armas, validan el uso indiscriminado de la fuerza para responder a los problemas sociales. Así que Colombia es un escenario perfecto para pensar esta transformación de las masculinidades militarizadas.
I think that's the first part. So yeah, of course, what Diana is saying, they are thinking about how to transform these militarized masculinities, because in transforming these militarized masculinities, there lies a big force to transform the militarized systems. In Colombia, she's telling, from when kids are 2, 3, 4 years old, they are sold this idea that the heroes of the nation are the military. The uniforms, the weapons, the capacity to conquer a territory. Even when children get a disguise, for example, for carnival, etc., they get disguised as military. And that, of course, then socializes them in order to think, and then when they adults validate the use of strength, the use of violence to solve, social problems, to validate weapons, to validate militarization and the military logic.
Ante esto, la primera herramienta es declararnos en objeción de conciencia ante esta utilización de las ideologías militaristas para generar relaciones sociales entre las personas y sobre todo contribuir a generar un mayor conocimiento sobre cómo hay un impacto tan marcado de estos patrones militaristas en la construcción de las masculinidades. Ahora ni que hablamos de cómo se relaciona esto con las nuevas perspectivas no binarias de los seres humanos, cómo quitamos esas marcas de la militarización en los sujetos que no nos definimos binarias, que no estamos aproximadas a esa hegemonía de lo masculino y lo femenino, que es lo que además el sistema militarista refuerza e intenta mantener, ¿no? Justamente esta lógica de dominación de lo masculino sobre lo femenino, y ahí todas las disidencias de género y los sujetos no binarios quedan por fuera de ese territorio marcado por el sistema militarista. Así que todo el trabajo está por hacer y estamos encantadas de poder contribuir a estas reflexiones.
There are at least 3 ways that they have been trying out. The first one is conscious objection to this militarist ideology and making it visible and questioning it. The second one would be to make the pact and the building of militarized masculinities visible. The third one is also to question the whole binary dichotomic identity of female, masculine, and in this way both just erase or transform this dichotomy, but also to transform the idea of power and of domination of the masculine towards the feminine. And they really want to continue working in this line and think it's very valuable to continue working in this line.
Great, thank you. I love the three particular paths: conscientious objection, making visible the pact between masculinity and militarism, and questioning this binary identity which kind of binds normative masculinity with militarism. Sylvie, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this question about, I believe it was you and Edvik who both raised the the terrible term, wonderful term of the grooming process of boys and men into identifying with militarized power. I wonder if you have any thoughts on this question of kind of breaking the relationship between militarism and masculinity and reframing it. If you're there, I would love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I'm here, and this concept of militarized masculinity on the patriarchy. We are talking about patriarchy, and then we can see militarized masculinity being one of the consequences of this patriarchy. So therefore, it's very important. And we are conducting a project with a few African countries, including Zimbabwe, DRC, and so on. And I can speak from the experience of these projects. What we can do to challenge the militarized masculinities are some of the things. First, the project that we are conducting is about engaging men and boys to work for peace. Just let me put it in simple terms. So it means that men and boys should be allies now for women. So it's not about having women and men and girls on one side and then men on. Let me put it, it's a he for she. It's very important to engage men and boys in this, the he for she policy. But from the experience of the project that you have conducted so far, it's important to do research, because research helps us to understand the degree, the level of the consequences, the impact of the militarized masculinities in the community in terms of devastating its impact. And therefore, this research helps to build the advocacy. And it's also important, we have conducted community dialogue, which has been very, very important to engage people at the community level. Also, from experience of the Cameroon context, it's very important to build alliances. We need to build alliances with other organizations, with other stakeholders to fight militarized masculinity. In Cameroon, for example, we were able to target some traditional leaders and some non-state groups, because these are the people who use this power, let me put it like that. So these traditional leaders become those who stand by our side to make their voices heard against the militarized masculinity. So building alliances with key stakeholders, including government officials, traditional leaders who make good use of harm, is extremely important to address the question, but also important to build alliance. Two other concrete things that I want to mention before I stop is that we feel that it's very important to move the money. We have to move the money from war to peace, as we say at WILPF. Moving the money here means that investing in education, investing in development sectors, making sure that people don't see that the weapon industry or the defense sector or the fossil fuel are the most important. We should invest the money, move the money to other sectors to make the youth, the young boy, the young girl know that there are other references like the defense, other than the defense and the fuel and so on. So it's important to move the money from war to peace. Therefore, all the youth, the young boy, the young girl will grow knowing that it's very important to invest more in peace than in war. The other thing concretely that I feel should be done also is to work in countries with the sectors, or let me say the ministries in charge of education, because it should start from primary school. It should start from kindergarten, where the way women and boys and girls are treated should start there, to see that it's very important. There is no difference between the two. It's there that we have to start deconstructing the patriarchal idea, the stereotype. I can see I have a few connection issues. So I want to sum up by saying that engagement with men and boys is extremely important. Research is also important. Capacity building, community dialogue, building alliances, engaging key stakeholders, working with education ministry, but most importantly, moving the money from war to peace, moving the money from safeguarding the environment, moving the money from war to gender equality. I think these are some of the ways that we can do to fight militarized masculinities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. Thank you. So, a pretty fulsome set of answers to your question. We have another question, which I will probably ask Edric and Lina to speak to, unless your question is for a specific panelist.
Oh, I don't think it's for a specific panelist, but my name
Please
is.
say who you are. And...
I am Ivan. I'm from the Danish youth movement, and right. I think all of this is very interesting. But a thought that struck me while listening was, I mean, Sylvia has been kind now to underline the whole path towards this demilitarized world and also demilitarized masculinity, which for me is also a good thing, a good path. My thought is, what does this demilitarized world look like? How does it function? What do you have a vision for that as well? Because I struck short because our world is so horrible and militarized. Did you have a vision for that?
Of the demilitarized world?
How does the demilitarized world look like and function?
Just a minor question. I don't know, Edric or Lina, if you would, either of you would like to kind of start to map out the vision of this demilitarized world, or if you'd like to answer in a slightly related format.
Okay. Okay, so I think you said, how does a demilitarized world look like? That is the world that we are all yearning for, a world where everyone has got equal access. Like I was saying, you've got equal access to resources, you've got equal opportunities to participate. Like I indicated earlier on, women are failing to participate fully from the extractive industry, right? Because it is highly militarized. That's number one. And number two, we are looking at a world where conflict is the order of the day. And look at what is happening in Ukraine and in Russia. What is happening to the environment? That's the militarized world. So when we're looking at the demilitarized world, we're looking at a world where we are able to take care of our environment because militarism is not taking center stage. So to me, I think that is the world that everyone is envisioning for, and that is the world that we all really want. That's the reason why we are sitting here, so that we can achieve a demilitarized world. I think I've answered that.
Thank you. Lina, I don't know if you want to take this on.
Yeah, I want to try, because like Edwig said, this is what we're all working for, and we haven't achieved it yet, so we don't know. Like, we can't describe it in detail. That would be foolish, I think. But one of the things that we want to do, and that I think is crucial in such a world, is what I was talking about reframing security, redefining security from the current national security paradigm where you ensure your own security by threatening to enact violence, to do harm to others. And this is a structure that we need to change. And I think this also ties a lot into how we change militarized masculinities. So changing this divide between someone who protects, someone who is protected, where the one who protects somebody else, generally, historically, a man protecting women and children. We've been hearing this a lot lately, again, which is very worrisome. But that means that men in this scenario always have to be ready to use violence to protect others. And there's an image, I mean, this is true, whether there is an actual external threat or not. This is something that they're supposed to be prepared to do regardless. So we make up threats to legitimate this violence, and it goes on and on. But if you're thinking about actual human needs, which we saw a lot more of during the pandemic, and think we need to see more of again, what I need to be safe and secure is generally not somebody out somewhere fighting for me. It's housing, food, relationships, being able to see the people that I care about and love, It's about knowing that this will be here for me tomorrow as well. So we need to change the entire protection paradigm into human security, feminist human security, where we look at human needs and not nation states and border control. So I think that would be the key step.
Thank you. And I will just reiterate Sylvia's refrain of "move the money." I think that's a great slogan that captures really quickly what we all hope for, is move the money away from. It's almost, as you say, it's almost impossible to imagine what that would be if, in fact, all of our national governments didn't have policies that prioritize militaries and budgets that prioritize militaries. We have just a couple of moments left. If is there another quick question? Thank you, and please be brief, and I'll ask our panelists to be brief in reply.
Thanks a lot. I'm Kati. I'm working for the European Environment Bureau, which is a large umbrella organization based in Brussels. And it's not so an easy question maybe, but I wonder what can we do also in the short term, because we see things happening. I mean, NATO expansion. I work on the EU fiscal rule. It's not a sexy topic, but what's basically happening, there's a lot of money being freed for military expenses on the expense of actually the necessary just transition. And also when we go back to the rules, it means austerity. So yeah, we have more military, but probably less for social and environmental things. And yeah, I feel a bit helpless because then often in the spaces we're also excluded in a dialogue. So I was wondering if you have any recommendations what we can do in a short time to not be locked in this for years in contracts. Why we also know that one of the biggest weapons is also like the energy transition, for example, into renewables. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you have some ideas what we can do in the short term. Thanks.
I'll open it to the panelists. Does anyone have a quick response to short-term solutions or short-term actions to shift this dynamic of militarism, militarized masculinity? Any short-term?
Organize.
I don't know.
I'd say.
Organize.
Yes.
One word. That's great. Organize. Do you have a word for us, Diana? One word?
En el caso de Colombia, votar en las próximas elecciones en favor de un gobierno transgresor y progresista que justamente ponga en el centro la vida y mueva el dinero de las armas a la gente. Eso es en el corto plazo, en nuestro caso, es en 15 días y eso puede significar una transformación importante en los sistemas electorales, pero más allá de lo que pasa en Colombia también hacer veeduría y control social con los recursos que cada uno y cada una de nosotras aporta al crecimiento de las naciones. ¿Qué pasa con mis recursos? ¿Qué pasa con mis impuestos? ¿A dónde va ese dinero que pago, que contribuyo? Eso es ya, no es para después, es ahora. Y por otro lado, nuestros círculos más próximos pueden ser sujetos de estas reflexiones. Generalmente pensamos que esto, hasta que no llega a nuestra vida, hasta que no pasa por nuestra piel, no nos corresponde. Pues el momento es es sumar los esfuerzos colectivos. Nosotras desde WILPF en Colombia creemos, y sé que todo WILPF lo hace, creemos en los movimientos colectivos de las mujeres y de las disidencias de género. Y creemos que en este momento es fundamental que nos ubiquemos en un lugar crítico para decir que el momento es ahora y que el momento de mover el dinero, el momento de mover los intereses y el momento de transformar no es en ese país ideal, en ese mundo ideal desmilitarizado. Es qué hago yo cuando salgo de esta conferencia para confrontar ese mundo militarizado.
Claudia, you have the task of reducing that to a couple of sentences.
The moment is now, and the question is, what will we do when we go out of this conference to change it? To have a dialogue with those that are closest to us so that we get all our efforts together, to do a real accountability and social vigilance of what is happening with our taxes, and in the case of Colombia, definitely voting for a new government that hopefully will put life in the center and move the money to the right place.
Move the money. Well, I would like to thank all of our panelists. Again, we have Edwige Mensuri, Sylvia Nagomo, Diana Salcedo, Lina Hjärtström, and Claudia Arena providing wonderful translation services. And thank you to all of you. Keep up the good work. Organize, move the money, agitate, vote, hope for electoral reform, and be brave and unstinting. So thank you very much. Thanks our panelists.
I would also like to say thank you to you, Joni Seeger, for moderating this in such an excellent way, bringing out the wonderful perspectives and experiences and knowledge that we have here. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. So, fantastic.
Thank you, Claudia,
Peace
so
Feminism.
much for coming and translating for us. Wonderful. Thank you, Diana Salcedo, Edwige, Matsimure, Lina Hjärtström, and Sylvie Ndongmo. Wonderful. And also a thank you to Katrin Geijer from WILPF International, who's been organizing this event, working very, very hard to get everything in place. So thank you.
And can I just say, many of you might have noticed the notes that Katrin and I were passing back and forth. She kept it all going. So thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.